we have on mind.
I just distributed, thank you for me, right? I just distributed chocolates and t-shirts to a young man who they developed a website in, what did he say, in some 6 days, which is so well done of SNU. So anyone who visits SNU, you can see not only map, location, Naveen chai shop ka menu kya hai, aaj ka khana kya.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so nice, right?
That's very nice. So with your permission, shall we begin?
Yes, yes.
So just to set the context, the essence of this interview is that we want to understand both from you, your growth and development as a leader. How have things changed from the time you took on to where you are now, but also to place it in the wider context of education in India, to see how school leadership is viewed, to see how school leaders are viewed and how they view themselves also. So we'll be asking questions from a range of connected areas.
I'm also guessing Seema and Manjima have heard a lot of these stories.
That's all right. This time those stories are going into the records.
Okay.
So no Chandragupta Hall stories, sir. Don't worry. We'll edit those out. Okay, over to Seema.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what does successful school leadership mean in India?
So which, if I were to put myself in, let's say, the CEO shoes, and we're looking at a school and looking at a principal of a school, how would I measure, or how would I say that the person had a successful tenure, right? That's, I suppose, the context of this, right? So I'd say it's actually a combination of many things, but if I were to start from the very core and the most elementary, and then expand on that, maybe that's how I'd like to see this. But at the core of a school, which is an incredible place because you've got 3.5-year-olds to 18-year-olds, right? Which is you pick any 15-year span of a human being's life, you can't think of anything greater in range of growth, mental, physical, emotional, social. So it's like an incredible space. You can be a 25-year-old and a 40-year-old, that's a 15-year span, and there's, not that much of a difference, but look at a 3-year-old to an 18-year-old. So it's an incredible space. So I think that at the core of it is whether there is the joy of learning, right? Which means, is there joy and is there learning? Is there a joy of learning? I think for me, if the school leader is able to create a culture where there is a joy of learning, I think that would be a successful leader. So I think the most elementary thing for me is that, is there the ability to create a joy of learning? And for that to really happen, it needs obviously children who are excited by learning, but also means having a tremendous team which sort of not only understands it, is be able to, string that down into actionable things and is able to execute that joy of learning. I think at the core of it is that. And when you expand the space to more than just the students and faculty and staff, that is, you look at the third dimension, which is also parents, and this we started when we started Shibnada School. We always said that, the words that we all use are, early team members about it takes a village to, educate a child, is because we had to make that choice. You see, when you think of an early institution, the choices you make later on, it becomes practice and it's part of life, which is, do we keep the parent outside the gate, or do we keep the parent welcoming inside? So everywhere we went, we realized that a parent's access to a school was so difficult. The physical access was so difficult. Forget about the emotional connect and the ability to interface, etc. So that's why we sort of took that call. So if you go to DPS Noida, you cannot get into the school, right? You go to many schools, you just can't get in through the door. So I think when you look at that joy of learning and creating that joy of learning is also the third element, which is bringing the parents into, and that's again a function of school leadership to be able to integrate. So we had those thoughts in the early days. Is it easier to just keep the parents out? It can be a troublesome group, right? So we said, no, we will work with them and keep that together. So I think at the core of it, it is this, that can you create a culture of joy of learning in the school by making that joyous for the child, by making that intensely curious and energizing for the teacher to be part of that journey, and of course integrate the parent into that story. So I think that is what I would think would be a successful school. If I expand on it, we used to also say that the real success, and it's maybe now you're making me look back on 2010 and 11 and 12, because at that time we were much more conscious of these questions and these answers. What would it mean to be successful as a Shiv Nada school? And we said that the real success will probably be at 35 or 40 years of the start of a school, when the students have put in about 15 years of work, and when you can look at your alumni and say, this is the students we produced, these are the children we produced, and the work that they do. And, to share lots of those early stories, and you said it's Chandragupta Hall, but here are some stories. Like I remember saying and asking Leena and lots of other people, who are the famous alumni of Sri Ram School? And you don't get names. And it's a great school. It is a fine school. But, at the end of the day, if you haven't produced alumni who are making changes to the world, making world a better place, like I spoke to the students on the first convocation, at the end of the day, it's also related to purpose and purpose of life. And this is something which sort of excites me now to say, the conversations around purpose of life, हम कौन से class तक कर सकते हैं? मतलब 5वीं में कर सकते हैं कि नहीं? I'm so excited by the way, I'm seriously excited about coming full time back to Shiv Nada school in a few months, but I want to figure that out. Walk into a grade 5, grade 6 and have that conversation, see where it goes, right? But ultimately, school students or young people should be purposeful. And I remember talking to some Rishi Valley teachers, educators, including Anna, who said, does it have to be? So, fundamental difference of opinion. Maybe there is merit in saying, just live a life and forget about being purposeful, right? But it somehow doesn't sit with me. It doesn't sit with me, because your purpose could be anything, right? It could be, like you say, purpose could be just the sheer joy of life. It could be music. It could be, just what you get out of theater and what you give other people. But it could be sport. It could be just being a nice human being and, just giving joy to other people. It doesn't obviously need to be marks and stuff like that. But over your life, and for example, people who run great households and may not have so-called worked in their life are extremely purposeful, because, they bring life to a family, to their environment around them, right? So I think going back to that, so it's about looking at alumni and feeling proud, and that takes a while. But I suppose in the shorter view, the 10-year view is also saying, what are the children doing when they leave school, right? And in fact, in Shiv Nada University, I'm very proud to say that for a young university, when I look at the alumni list, it's very impressive. And same thing, you go to Ashoka and you don't find it impressive, right? For everything else, about the quality of the students and the faculty. My nephew went to Ashoka, and I look at that and I look at the alumni. Both are young universities, but what do students do? Where do they go? Could be another measure of sort of success. So I would summarize it into these three things. One is to create the joy of learning, which includes these three people. Ideally, also look at your alumni and say, okay, this is where kids who graduate from here like have done in their life. And on the shorter story, okay, where did they go? Did they become entrepreneurs? Did they go to the right colleges? And the final summary is, of course, which is a phrase which has never left me, which is students who graduate happy in their own skin. And honestly, I know the first batch fairly well. I don't know the second and the third batch that much, but to a large extent, that first batch gave me that joy. You know, it's your first batch, and yet if you feel that, oh, these kids are sorted, that gives you that feeling. So I think that's how I would measure the success of a school. And interestingly, when I talk to many people outside, and you must be having the same experience. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a parent who's, saying that it's just so different to see a Shiv Nada school 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, right? Because that's the conversation. They seem so sorted.
Yeah. Okay.
Asking the right questions, being humble. I mean, that's what is being happy in your own skin,
Okay, so you have seen the world, and you have seen different educational systems across. You talk too much about the Finnish schools. So what is it that we do differently in SNS that we have earned this good place to work or great place to work for last 3 years? We have been consistently receiving that. So is there any mantra that you feel that we have, or how will you account this success? To who is accountable for this?
For the great place to work,
Yes.
well, obviously the great place to work is a reflection of how people at the Shiv Nada school feel about their lives at school. So if I were to credit anyone, it's the teams at the school, because that's where most of us work. It's the teams at the school. I would credit a lot of it, honestly, to the early people if I were to credit somebody, I would credit it to the early people at the Shiv Nada school. Let's say the first 20, 30 people at each of the schools would be credited in creating that atmosphere, right? And I suppose for both of you who've been there in that sort of early journey, I think because we also must have had that conversation about, for example, again, going back, what are you fearful about? The fearful about is will the 2012 and the 13 batch not treat the 14 and the 15 younger teachers not so well? Because it's a different journey. Because for the first 2 years, the journey is very different. And others will feel that they're missing out. And you will also feel that, okay, what did you guys do? You don't know what all we did. And that sort of, so I think the fact that 7, 8 years on, 9 years on, it's not just the early people who are responding to that Great Places to Work survey. It's everybody who's responding to the survey, and everybody else after the first 2 years is overwhelmingly the greater number. And the fact that the greater number responds to that survey in this manner is because the early people have created the culture of this being a great place to work. And what is a great place to work? At the end of the day, the great place to work is essentially around, I get respect at work, my work is valued, there is curiosity, there is joy. When you look at these 3, 4 things, that's what a great place to work is, right? There's respect, there's value, there is joy, and there is curiosity, which means I'm learning. When that happens, and that happens across for everybody, because every day you sit in your bus and your car and you go back and you're sort of replaying your busy day, you say, okay, this was an interesting moment. This was a curiously nice moment. This was a joyous moment. I think that's what makes a great place to work. And then you say, okay, feels like going back again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Over to you, Manjima.
Thank you. Gopal sir, when you look at all the very many things that you considered, going back to the early days, when you were building the school, you've talked about the joy of learning, and that's something that you are perceived today. But was that the first thing that was on your mind when you were building the school? What were the things that you were considering? And what was, if you had to organize it in any way, what would be on top of that? As a school leader, what were the most important things for you?
Well, it's interesting. The most important things were not as lofty as it seems right now. I think with Shikhar being the first CEO and with Mr. Nada, for example, having met me in an interview, right, which I'll never forget in my life. It's a 1 hour, 10-minute time with a man who, firstly, I don't know if I ever told you the story of when I met Mr. Nada for the first time. Okay, so I must tell you that, I was told through a series of meetings which I had that, okay, now we have to meet Mr. Nada. So I said, Mr. Nada meeting a project director of a school which HCL wants to start, like, why would Mr. Nada meet? So it took me 2 days to figure. And the first question which I asked myself is, why would such a school exist? Why would he or the foundation want to start a fee-paying city school? So I had to ask myself that question, and I asked that to every important person who's joining us now, that why do, have you figured why we exist? Because from that comes the purpose, right? Why step-by-step exists, or a government school exists, or KR Mangalam exists, all has a reason, right? So we have to ask ourselves, why does the Shiv Nada school exist? But through all that, I was told I'm going to meet, and I went to this very expansive waiting area in the lobby in Mr. Nada's floor. I was in my shirt and tie and coat and waiting, and I know that Mr. Nada's, better be dressed like that. And I was visualizing I'll go into a boardroom with, many people, and there will be Mr. Nada will walk in, I'll stand up and, exchange greetings and sit down. And suddenly I saw someone walking towards me. I looked and I said, that looks like Mr. Nada. Why is he walking towards me? And he had a file in his hand, and he came up to me. I stood up and he said, Colonel Gopal. I said, sir, it's an absolute privilege to meet you. Then he said, come. So we walked. And then we went into the boardroom. There was Mr. Nada and there was Gopal. There was not a single other person. Put the file on the table, and he said, Gopal, this meeting is about you. Tell me in about 15 minutes about your life. Tell me in about 20 minutes what you did in the army, and tell me about 20 minutes what you're doing now. And throughout that 1 hour, 10 minutes, Mr. Nada spoke 3 sentences. 3 short sentences. Then Gopal was just talking because he was not saying anything. So that itself is a story. What are the 3 questions? So when I reached 1990, he said, by this time you must have been married. I had finished my whole 30 years of my life. He didn't ask a single thing, not a single thing about my father or whatever. He didn't ask a single thing. So I said, okay, he wants to know about my family. Then I said something about commanding of my battalion. He asked one more question. And I finished. He said, do you enjoy what you do? That's it. So I think at that point of time, with Shikhar, the new person in the family who's got this huge responsibility, land, building, architect, principals, it was all about saying, will we get 200 children in the first year? And our first parameter of success was 2-3 things. And I, in fact, shared that with Mr. Nada. Do we get everything right 1 week before the school starts? So I said, Mr. Nada, for me, there are 3 parts of a good start. One is to make sure 1 week before everything that we have planned is okay, which is everything, right? Which means building, the team together, the right number of students, the faculty, the teachers, the syllabus, the curriculum, all that. And one is one day after the school starts to make sure that everything worked properly.
Yeah.
And the next is 1 year after we've started a school. So our immediate aim to be successful was to say, we get about 200 students. That means we've explained to everybody that this is a good school. Send your children here, trust us, because we have no body of work. So it was only about making sure the stories out there, making yourself credible, making yourself honest and believable, and making sure that you have the right people on the team who can explain that what we're going to do and put that together. So I think success initially was only that, just get the right number of students on the campus, do a really good job in the first year. And of course, all the rest of it, the conversations around, with Ava about Anandam and the whole AHA program and, all that sort of got built around it. But in fact, for that program itself, I thought with the 3 principles, it did come from me, the thought of, how to extend school by not only hours, but by also saying equal importance to sport and art, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what makes us distinctly human. Everything else, computers, algorithms, data science is sort of going to take over, and they continue to do that. But education is about what makes us human. And what makes us human is actually the arts, right? It is through that you feel human, right? If you feel emotions, you feel unexplained emotions, not just emotion. It's only through art that you feel emotions which come out of you, right? Which you don't even know. So I think that part, I thought, is going to take this whole many days of convincing the principals about why not a 1:30 school and why a 3:30 school and why other teachers will not come because, they're happy to go back home and have lunch at home. And Shikhar definitely wasn't very sure. He said, how will we get good teachers if we're going to have longer hours? And will parents want to send their little children? And in the beginning, it's all little children, right? Yeah. For these extended hours who are, grade 1 and grade 2. But I suppose the rest of it sort of came together simply because, for example, that first meeting, I think, took 40 minutes with both the principals saying, absolutely, let's do this like that. So it was with Shashir, it was the easiest conversation to say, yes, of course, that's how we should go. So short story is the first year goals were very, very clear. Get kids of the right number, because if it is, however good the story is, if you have less than 100 children the first year, you will struggle because you got something right. Either you got the fee point wrong, or you got your story wrong, or your conviction is not okay, or you started in the wrong location. Something went wrong. But when the 140 went to like 200 in about three odd months, he said, okay, the ship is sailing.
So I remember in the first year, particularly, you had a big role to play when it came to parents, particularly meeting them. And I think well into May, we were conducting regular meetings with parents. I think once a week or so, you would come down and you would meet a group of parents. This is something that as a community we've built up, but looking at the wider community now, what do you feel is the role that stakeholders play? It's one thing to say that parents must feel welcomed into the space, but how far do you think the parent community's role goes as far as school is concerned? Their expectations, their, what they say, what they want. How would you balance that with the way that the school views itself?
Yeah, so I think for me, making those distinctions were never difficult, right? Remember, I used to ask them this quiz that your child is in grade 2. Who's the best person to know whether math is to be taught in a particular way? You have 3 choices: the math teacher, the principal, or the parent. You can take one. So I said, let the math teacher, leave her to do her job, right? You're not the expert on the math teacher, then you should be teaching, right? You're not the math teacher. You may have a view because of what you see and what you learned or what you saw of someone else. So I think for me, that distinction about what the parent should do and how much you should listen to the parent. I don't think there was much confusion there, but I think the first part was that, do we allow parents to come into the school and spend time with them, or we just say, leave your children here, we will educate, we come and pick them up, right? And that's it, come for your PTMs. I think it's because of exactly that, which you'll see that, you see a Shiv Nadar school child who wants to stay longer and bring the parents at school, because you need the parent to feel that this is a space which is common and it's for everybody. You will have the naysayers, you will have we had more than our initial share in the first 2-3 years. I think it's a lot less now, but you will have the odd discordant sort of situations. But I think including the parents in the conversation is extremely valuable. Also, I think in the insular families that we now are, the nuclear families that we now are, parents need a lot of help. And some of the stuff that you all do in school and which you've taken forward, the counseling part and the parent partnerships and the conversations help the parents themselves to raise kids better, right? So I think there is that role that school plays, and that's again all the not only just our own counselors, but the experts we got from the outside constantly to speak about how to raise children, and that conversation you have with your own group, I think is also very valuable, because it gives you everybody doesn't have larger families of grandchildren and grandparents and aunts and uncles to guide. So I think that part is also sort of very valuable. Honestly, on academics, if you are ever guided by parents, I think we're not doing a great job. I wouldn't be guided by parents on academics, because that's what I keep saying. It's our job, right? So that's not a space we should ever cede, and no good principal should ever cede that space, because it's our job. No engineer should be told by a non-engineer how to build anything, right? Similarly, no teacher needs to be told how to teach.
Sir, zooming out a little bit and looking at the parent as a stakeholder in a wider society. In Indian society, we've seen, particularly over the last several years, a lot of activism where parents are concerned, and a lot of lobbying, etc. How do you see the role of the school as a space in terms of, when you look at the expectations of the local community, particularly the government sometimes, sometimes the parent bodies, sometimes even the educational institutions that are around. As a leader, how important are those conversations for you? And how far do they influence the decisions you take? Or would you say that it's a balance? Or I don't know, how would you look at that?
So in terms of the external influences or stakeholders, what do you mean? Are you talking about the government, local governments?
So local governments function in a certain way, but there are also, when it comes to decisions, even business decisions of the school, for instance, the fee raising thing is something that there's nothing we can do about, because there's a government directive that comes our way. But there is a lot of parental pressure also leading to that. There's a lot of parent activism that's also leading to that.
So I think, I think it stems from the fact that India is unfortunately a unique country, which is so large in terms of population and so poorly impacted by government schooling, public schooling, right? We have a very, very, very poor percentage of children going to public schooling. Now, when you look at this across the world, of any country which has more than, say, 40, 50 million population, and we have a, we are talking about 1.3 billion people, everywhere, not more than 10% of children go to public schooling. Not more than 10%. 90% of children go to public schooling. Not more than 10% go to private schooling. But we have a situation where the public school system is actually collapsing, except in a few states, Kerala, Delhi being notable exceptions, Delhi recently. But generally, the public school system is now catering, unfortunately, in my view, to first generation learners. Now, if that be the case, the pressure on private schooling will be huge. And therefore, all these price points you have to cater for. And look at it like this, that a school which charges 10,000 a year, 30,000 a year, 50,000 a year, 1 lakh a year, or 2 lakh a year, what does the parent look for? Always aspire for the next higher thing than what you can afford. It's the same thing. Yeah. You want to buy the bigger car than you can afford. You want to buy the bigger fridge than you can afford. But more than that, you want to afford the best school for your child. And therefore, every 10% increase in fee does make a difference. And therefore, there will be activism to that. So therefore, I think it's not unfair that they worry. Because they're always stressed to pay the fees. And I think at every layer there is that happening. It's not that you get a particular segment and therefore it won't happen. Sure, the British school or the super, Vasant Vihar people may not have a problem, but many other segments there will be. And I think what we have seen over the last 5-6 years is that governments have taken cognizance of this yearly challenge. And they've passed laws in their own assemblies. So both Noida has done that, Gurgaon has done that, and therefore they've come to this metrics as far as the fee increase is concerned. So it's sort of settled, which means the parent has to compromise. Don't buy the bigger car, but send your child to the better school, right? And that's the sort of choices people have to make, because cost of running a school will keep increasing. And therefore that challenge will be there. So it's not unfair that these things get raised from an activist point of view. But at the end of the day, schools have to be sustainable. In our case, of course, it's a completely unique situation that we are in. That, for example, the land and building, nobody even asks us. If you look at the fact that most schools have to make 30, and your young leaders in the space, most schools have to make 20 to 30% of their income has to go towards the dues on the land and the building, which means that we took loans to construct this, or it's called cost of capital. Right? In our case, it's like a gift from the foundation. So we earn 100, we spend 100. Our purpose is completely different. Our purpose is not to make that surplus, but anyone who invests 100 crore rupees is expecting 3-4 crores of rupees every year. Otherwise, why is the person running it? And plus, he's taken land and building on either a loan or whatever it is, you expect returns. So running a school, therefore, isn't easy. Then there is a whole aspect of compliance, and that's the other challenge, right? Legally, you can make reasonable surplus, but not profit is the word. Whereas you go to Singapore, your 2 schools on the website, you'll say for-profit school, or it'll say not-for-profit school. So you are very clear. It's like a company. You run a school. It's a business proposition. You send your child. If it doesn't work for you, go somewhere else. Right? But in India, it's still run by a trust or a society. And it's still supposed to be that you can make reasonable profits, surpluses, which you can use for bettering the school, but you're not supposed to make profits. So all those challenges are there. Yeah.
Thank you. Over to you, Seema.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have completed 10 years, and you can see yourself where you were in the year 1 and where have we come in year 10. So, sir, has there been any barometer which has measured your success or which you have looked up to and kept on raising your bar? Or, I mean, how did you account? How do you are you accountable for the landmarks that you have created? Have there been any challenges? Did you try to strategize and keep moving ahead? So, if you can just share that with us.
Yeah, it's interesting. While I'm constantly seized, and I must tell both of you that this is the first time articulating many of the thoughts which are coming to my mind provoked by you. So I definitely want a bit of this recording.
Okay.
So it's interesting that while I've always been seized with saying, how do I measure my success? How do I measure the school success? What happens 10 years later? What happens in the next 10 years? Some of that saw reason and form through conversations, obviously, with Mr. Nadar and with Shikhar, right? And both are obviously very different people. Mr. Nadar doesn't speak a great deal, but when he does, you know what's expected. So I think one day, a couple of years or a year and a half on, he asked Shikhar that you've got the world at your feet in terms of resources. And what are you doing about it? It took us 6 months to sort of figure and sort of convince Mr. Nadar that we could call the school Shiv Nadar School. He was very clear it will not be called Shiv Nadar School. He said, we called the school of the foundation. I remember those early conversations. He kept saying, no, my name should not be associated with anything where there is a transaction and there's money involved and fees involved, etc. Right? Vidyagyan is fine and SSN is fine because SSN, the cost of the fees and what they spend is a huge difference. And that's true in Shiv Nadar University too. So I'm talking about 2010. This is not even 11 when the university was born. This is 2010. But obviously, to just excel and set those highest of benchmarks in schooling was clearly the mandate, clearly the goal, and clearly the way to look at success, right? And while there are no fixed parameters and barometers like you have in Times rankings, and the university has much more credible rankings, our ranking is through something very simple. How many people stand outside the door for admissions, right? So the community that you serve, what do they feel about the school, right? And that's the only credible measure. And on that count, I suppose from year 2, we were always successful, which is an incredible achievement. From the second year to always say, we don't have an issue of numbers and admissions means that we got off to a pretty good start. Right? And we became credible. And I'll say again, the first year when we were sort of doing these reviews, Mr. Nadar, I think once said to me, we were less people and Shikhar was, I think, outside. And he said that, and that's why I remember these early conversations. And he said, after 1 year, if it is because of my name or HCL that the students are coming or parents are coming to you, then you're not doing a good job. That means you can lean on Mr. Nadar's reputation or HCL for like a year. After that is what you do inside the school, which should get people in, right? Which is so true. So that became another sort of benchmark. So I think when we look back on the 10 years, obviously, it's very well received by the community, as we can see by the fact that, how is the school spoken of? What's the number of people standing outside the door for admissions? There's not a single day that I do not get an admission request. There's not a single day. There are 2 today. And many of them are impossible because if there is no seat in grade 5, there is no seat. People don't understand. They think there's this unending vacancies, khali seats lying around. And I'm sure you have the same situation wherever you live and your friend circles, etc. So I think first is that measure. To that extent, we'd say we've done a pretty credible job. But I think what we looked up to, and again, a lesson from Mr. Nada, is that we were asked this question and we said, there was a bit, at least in my head, I said, we're going to build such a fine school. We don't need to look at other schools. So he said, no. When I started HCL, I looked out and I said, HP, and I need to go and see how this is a great company. And he said, I waited outside the chairman's door for 2 hours to get to talk to him. So he said, go out and see the best schools. And that's why we made all those trips, right? The trips to England, the trips to the Middle East, to see the GEM school, trips all around India, from Riverside to Modern School to Sri Ram School to at least 3 schools in Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad. So we went to several places to observe. Doon School, of course, twice. The school in Mussoorie.
Woodstock.
So these are all schools we visited to look at what are the best practices. So, for example, the CGC thing came from Doon School. We were quite clear that's how we'll, do that. So I think that's how. So that's how we sort of learned and benchmarked and learned from many practices. But I think looking at the next 10 years, again, Shiv Nada School cannot sit on its oars. We've got to be among the best schools in the world in the next 10 years. And that's where we should be aiming, and that's what we should be looking at doing.
Right. Yeah. Over to you, Manjima.
Thank you, Seema ma'am. So when you look at all these schools that you visited, you made all these trips. Is there one such trip that really left an impression on you? Or any of the particular places you visited? Any practices you saw being followed?
Yeah, so interestingly, as you said, we went to many schools, and Doon School was certainly prominent among the schools we went to. But I suppose, curiously, now that interestingly you are talking leadership, and that's what the FLP is about. I suppose both the school leader and the school, which interestingly impressed us a great deal, Shikhar and I, was the Aditi Malia School. And the interesting part of the Aditi Malia School were many, right? But the couple of things which stood out is that the principal, Mr. Satish, as you enter the school, if you see where Pooja's team sits, right? Enter through the door, you see the principal sitting on the left. And the space that Pooja's team has, his office half that size. You could put a desk and 2 chairs, and that is it. You couldn't move a third person there. And it was very impressive to see a principal sitting in the small space and watching and having conversation with virtually anyone who was going past. And he himself was such a self-effacing, humble, easygoing sort of person, but very clear in his head about the school. And the school had lots of greenery. It looked very close to nature. It was run very efficiently. And I've been to the school before as a nephew's uncle. So I'd also seen this, which is where my nephew and my niece went. So I've been there earlier. And we felt that. So one was the whole space and the way the space was. And of course, the principal, the space, the sheer efficiency of conversation, what they were aiming to do. For example, the parent-teacher meetings are so beautifully organized. You will be told that, Gopal, your time is 4:10. If you reach at 4:11, your parent-teacher meeting is over. Come next time. And you have to only reach that 4:05 because at 4:10 your meeting will start. And if your time is 20 minutes, you can get 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on how much time the teacher wants to speak to you. You could even ask for a slot. Whatever is your slot, you will get that, and you will. So, and nobody's, shoves themselves inside the classroom when the teacher's talking to that parent. So there were many parts of that school which were very impressive. Students were very sort of grounded. So I suppose that's one school which sort of stood out. Yeah.
Also, when you explore all the schools that you were working with, also you're very fond of leadership books. Any theories that you saw in action, or any theories that have really played a big role in influencing you?
In school leadership.
In school leadership, or leadership per se.
Oh yeah. So I think, in fact, I was writing 3 today morning. So you know that I suppose so. Leadership principles I've also discovered, Seema and Manjima, are fairly universal in the sense that I don't think there's too much of a distinction between the 30 years I spent in uniform and various leadership roles and in the school, because I think many of these principles, in fact, I'm writing more of them. I'm trying to actually summarize, coincidentally that you asked me this, and some of them I can't remember. They were in my head in the morning. I think one of them obviously is that whatever you do in leadership, you must be credible and you must be seen as credible. And that can change in the way you come through externally depending on your audience. But the fact that you need to be credible and you must be seen to be credible, which is actually very connected. Some people can be very credible without being seen to be credible, right? And that's the rough edges which need to be polished in leadership, because it's not about just who you are. It is how you are seen by others, right? And therefore, the ability to change. For example, I remember Shikhar saying after 2-3 times that he saw me on stage, saying that I can't believe you're the same guy, because, you don't seem to be that same person when you're on stage, because otherwise I am not naturally, let's say, gregarious. I don't know if you know that, but I'm not. I'd rather sit quietly in one corner. But if you are required to be, then you have to do that very well, right? And this was taught to me by a major general when I was a major. And he said that leadership it's not just being exactly who you are. It's about who you are expected to be, continuing to retain being credible, right? Because it doesn't mean you become somebody else who you're not. But who you think you are is not necessarily what sometimes your audience needs, right? So you've got to do that bit. And that's one big learning of leadership, right? Just like being a teacher, always when you enter the class, as I often say, you have to carry that smile, doesn't it? You can't be yourself by saying, I had a bad day and we had a big fight and I had a late night. You can't. Because for those 30 kids, that first look on your face is very clear, right? So the teacher, as they say, great teaching is great drama, right, Manjima? I think there's a phrase like that. There's no difference. Great teaching and great drama is the same thing, right? So you are an actress and you are an actor. So similarly in leadership, there is that role that you have to play act without losing credibility. Not deep inside you as well as how you're perceived. I think that's one fundamental sort of principle. But there are many others. For example, as I often say, praise in public, criticize in private is a fundamental element of leadership. However much you lose your cool, The only time you're allowed to lose your cool in public, when it is drama. I am doing it because I want that message to go, that being angry and what I'm conveying is good for the audience. Because you're saying, that's a line or draw, that's not acceptable. Let everybody know, it doesn't matter. Right? Even at the cost of someone, because you want that message to go, and that's the only way. But those instances have to be few and far between. You can't afford to, throw your weight or your temper around. The recent thing I wrote down, this is copyrighted by me, so you will never find it on Google, is because I'm dealing with a couple of people and I kept saying that this is the way to summarize these guys, that maturity is having a speed breaker between your brain and your mouth. If everything that your brain thinks or your heart feels, you suddenly blurt it out, that's not being mature. So in leadership, that's very true. You got to weigh your words. And that's why the 24-hour rule, for example, you get peeved by something, as long as there's no safety issue involved, nobody's life is upset, keep it to yourself for 24 hours. Let it stew inside. You'll get a little more balance. You'll get to see perspective. You will feel empathy. You will understand why the other person is saying something or reacting in a particular way. And you will figure a side that you may not have seen. So I think those are all sort of fundamental principles. Maybe I'll send you a few more.
No, that's great. Thank you. Over to you, Seema ma'am.
You're on mute.
Sir, how important is professional development of teachers in the education system?
Yeah, again, that's one area we haven't reached some of the things we set out to do in the first 2 years, which is Lotus mentoring system. I don't know if you remember, certification 1, certification 2, certification 3, right? So you realize that we figured early, and Shikha is such a believer in that, and I think Aarti would have contributed a little bit to that, is that, the joy of coming to work is also about improvement, about learning. And there is some stuff which happens informally. But if you put a formal system in place and people are challenged, and that's what they talk about, that's what they look up to. And I think obviously the organization get better, but also the individual, when you have the opportunity to hone your skills and get better at what you do, and not just in the core of your teaching and learning, but also in the development of yourself. So whether it's in the travel opportunities or being part of projects or, learning outside your space by learning counseling. And Shashi and I talked recently about TOK, and she told me 3 years ago that you must do it. I haven't been able to. So I told her, I still want to do that TOK thing, because I think for everybody, to nearly most people, unknown to them sometimes, there is great joy in learning. And if you get that trigger and that, a part of the person sort of started, then it's very valuable for the individual, and because we're a collection of individuals for the organization. So I think self-development is central to obviously to the teacher, because then you're always looking up and saying, so okay, what am I? So for example, what we did last year, which is again something we want to do a lot before, where like Anju ma'am says, agency. Can I take responsibility? These are the 8 modules which are going on. Can I do this, right? And of course, putting money out to be able to say, go out and do these external programs, etc. So I think that part is extremely important. Self-development is very important.
So according to you, the professional development of the teaching faculty impacts the learning outcomes of students in a successful school leadership?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. While there is great joy for me, the individual, but obviously by becoming a better teacher and a better human being and a better professional, obviously it is going to translate into my class. And it makes a massive difference. It makes a massive difference. Yeah.
Yes. Over to you, Manjima.
So last set of questions, sir.
Yeah.
You always tell us stories from your military days, from your army days. And we realize that 30 years in the army has shaped you in many different ways. But when you stepped into the educational space, particularly Shiv Nadar School, was there any unlearning you had to do?
Very good question. So I have often told you that it was too much of your amusement and curiosity and incredulity that, oh, how can you say it's the same thing? Remember I used to initially say that you are in the second best profession in the world, first being the military, only because there I've seen people who are willing to easily sacrifice their lives for the cause, which was just the most incredible thing. But I think in terms of unlearning, I'm not sure it was unlearning. It was probably a bit of restructuring my own thinking about how organizations work, and we're setting up an institution and how that works. So I think in terms of what I've carried from the army to the school space is a lot more than the ones which I was conscious not to carry, right? I think there's, I suppose if there was only a couple of things, it was about what we call implicit obedience to orders, right? Because in the army, and I was sharing this once with Mr. Nada, the only time I traveled in the Phantom, which it was again it's incredible that I suppose I spoke 80% of the time, and Mr. Nada spoke, so it's just incredible. We were on the way to Gurgaon because Shikhar was a bit indisposed, and he called me up in the evening saying, "I can't come, so can you go travel with Mr. Nada?" So, amazing experience too. Firstly, be at his place in Friends Colony at, I think, 8. I was there at 7:45 or 7:50. And Mr. Nada firstly came out at 7:59. So that was so impressive that it's not 2 minutes late or 3 minutes late or 10 minutes late. He was there 1 minute early. And we talked about how decision making happens in the army. So at the planning stage, there is a lot of listening. There is a lot of listening to subordinates and junior leaders and all that. But once the plan is made, in the execution stage, there is no chew. There is just get the job done. Then you will not say that was a better plan. We could have done this. We didn't have to do this. It never happens. So I think that part of implicit obedience to orders is obviously not. You need to convince people, and I think that was one clear part, which is a bit different. But I think I carried more of what I learned in the army into the school system. Yeah.
If there was one person you could identify as having the most amount of influence on you as a leader, who would that be?
Actually, again, very interesting. I have been tremendously lucky in my life in terms of observation at close range of great leadership, simply because my first 3 commanding officers, actually but obviously when you're a young person, you're in your 20s to your 30s, the first 3 commanding officers at that sort of age made an incredible impression, incredible. And I look back, Brigadier Suri Kapoor, who passed last year, and his daughter sent all of us a brass water thing with his name. He was a huge influence on being positive when you're an institution leader. I mean, that's what I think I learned from Brigadier Kapoor more than anything else. Having pride in your outfit and being positive minded, because it infuses into everybody. Because if the leader is not moaning and groaning and with a long face, obviously, if he's always joyful, always saying good things and saying ours is the best unit and all that. So, so that was the learning from him. With John Servate, who was my second CEO, it was about being very, thoughtful, process-driven, thinking everything through before you execute, and being very meticulous, and yet being visionary and thinking ahead. And the third CEO, Brigadier Sethi, who lives in West Delhi, Rajouri Garden. John Servate lives in Bangalore. And he was so high on integrity. Just in every way, there was that integrity being such a high hallmark of everything. Very proper, very, very precise, very high on just financial and other integrity, I think. So there were always, obviously, those three people had a huge influence. Many other people, I would say, could learn from anyone. You could learn from, like Shikhar once said, president to peon, right? If you give respect, that's what it is about an institution. So there would be many lessons from Shikhar. There would be, I've told you many stories from Mr. Nada, of course, but principles, our own principles, many teachers, I suppose there'd be many influences. I'm very observant about these things.
That's all the education for life. And that's actually my last but one question, which is when we started, we were just going over, we're doing this coffee table book for the Shiv Nada school across the 3 campuses right now. And one of the things we were going through, Naresh sent us these early ideation files, and we were going through those. And there were so many iterations of the school logo and, what do we want to say? Yeah. What made you decide on education for life?
Oh, tremendous. Actually, I suppose all these early things which happen, they just stay with you because it happened at a particular moment. Like it's like yesterday, I can just figure it out. So obviously, there were conversations about logo, about having this tagline, right? Should we do it? Should we not do it? And we were discussing a few things. HCL has a logo, has a line, which is something about life. Now I forget. So I walked into, we were walking, Shikhar and I were walking together into the Sector 3 office, and the HCL board had that line about something about life, I forget. So that's how that conversation happened. I said, Shikhar, look at that, HCL. Something, I'll just tell you the phrase. So I said, why not education for life? He said, yeah, it looks tremendous. So that's how education for life happened. And it just sort of fit in with all the conversation that we were having. It just looked like just such an apt sort of phrase. Of course, a lot of parents in the early days kept saying that, we were drawn by this education for life. It wasn't that we thought it through and got it through some agency or something. It just happened. It just resonated very well with what we had in mind. And I suppose it sums up what a school should be, right? It sums up what a school should be. It is about education for life. And the more you see children, which all of you do through your own children and all the countless children that go through you, that the early influences are not only immense, but if I may use a phrase, they are irretrievable from the influence it has in your life. And if you've had the wrong influences, it is very difficult to get it out of your system. So I think that's why education for life is so important and so central to what a great school should be.
Okay, last question, but it's a two-parter. how important is reflection to you as a person in terms of as a practice? And on reflecting, do you see yourself having changed as a leader in terms of your style, in terms of your priorities in the last 10 years?
I think in some ways, the second part of that is for others to judge. So maybe you should do a survey for those who are my direct line of reporting to say. Sometimes I do get that allegation that you've changed a lot. You are not so hasty but I think that was about 2 years ago. I used to have that phase, I think, or 3 years ago, I don't know. But I think to the first part, reflection, Manjima, Seema, is everything, is everything. Your growth is only, that's why the reflection diary, that's why the encouragement to say, okay, you heard this and write back, it's like this, okay, I've had this session with 25 new teachers and I say, okay, everybody write back, you've got 24 hours, you will write back, I will tag you. It's because it's just about saying, think and reflect, because the way we lead our lives, we'll just go to the next thing. And for a teacher who's got a house to run, who's got children to bring up of her own, who's got a husband and spouse to take care of, and maybe in-laws and parents, it's a constant 24-hour cycle of action. Where is reaction, reflection, right? So where's the time? So unless you bring that into the system, remember early days we used to say, take half an hour to yourself, doesn't matter, right? So in fact, I think there's again, Chandragupta Hall story, edit it out, please, is one day I remember my wife asked me that, because she would go early to Lotus Valley, it was 7:30 or so, and sometimes I used to take off at 7 o'clock to play my badminton, right? And she asked me with frustration that for you, your morning badminton is more important than spending half an hour with me in the morning. So obviously you don't react to your wife's anger, but immediate reaction to me was, yes, it is, it was inside me. I said, of course it is, because that's my reflection time. When I take Roger for a walk through, for a kilometer to my badminton court, tie Roger there. So it was so important that the time that you get right now, I cycle on the campus in the morning and, get that time before my badminton. But I think, in fact, as leaders, one of the challenges or one of the things that you must always do is to have practices of reflection, because some people don't do it naturally. So you have to say, write it down, come back to me. What are the 3 things you picked up? That's a cycle of reflection. And therefore, I think reflection is incredibly important. In terms of changes in leadership between the last 10 years, I think some of my basic principles are quite similar. But yeah, when I moved into the university, it was a different cup of tea. It was a different space. Just like, at the school, it was easier because I was a first one on the starting blocks as 001. So, you could, but here it was a university which was already in being for 8 years. And to shape that in a particular way, or to put your own shoulder to what was happening, I suppose there was a need to integrate a lot and listen a lot more, great deal, learn a great deal, because it's a completely new. It was a completely new space for me, and academics, senior professors. There's a whole range of trying to put yourself in the other shoes. A lot of that, right? But about specifically how I've changed, I suppose you should do a little survey with Shashi and Anju and Monica and other people. Maybe you'll figure.
The only change I see is we get to see you less now. Because I remember the first 2 years used to step into our class, that OLE used to happen, that
Yeah,
olive rendezvous with the
yeah.
first
Still,
batch, remember?
yeah, I know. It's just so obviously this is one area again in leadership that you have to be very conscious of, between running a small team and running a team which gets bigger and bigger. Is I spoke of this recently, which again, it was this opportunity, just like I have today, to articulate things which are like inside the head, right? It was about leadership attention. In fact, I do need that video. It is a week ago. In fact, it may be valuable to FLP fellows, by the way. Leadership attention and the importance of leadership attention is very central to institutions. What does the leader focus on? Jaisa Raja, Vaisa Praja, right? What does the leader focus on? So that when the span gets wider, either you will focus on a few things and not focus on a few things, or focus little on everything, where again it's not valuable, right? So in fact, that's the biggest challenge. And for people to know, that who are grown with you in the institution, that you are not going to get the same amount of time with me, right? Because and that's a sort of a loss, right, in so many ways. But at the same time, that's also about their growth and their growing to say, we will take the load and take that forward. And that I see tremendously, particularly in the Shibnana School, Noida. I mean, the sort of homegrown leaders that you've created is a great joy, right? So leadership absence has that advantage that others will step forth, right?
I think that's what distributed leadership is.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gopal
Thank you
sir,
so
for
much,
this
sir.
time. I know
Thank
you must
you.
be at the end of a long day waiting to go home.
No. I think that was nice. I like a recording of this conversation.
Yeah,
I'll share
sure.
that. I'll share it with Shelly.
And I will try and figure that leadership attention thing. It was a short one. I don't remember.
Okay.
It wasn't with you, right? So I have to figure where that is. Okay.
Thank you so